Good day, folks. It's Tony Fortunato from the technology firm. Today we're going to do a little session on Know Your Tools. And in this case, we're going to look at Wireshark and Network Critical Smart NA XL. You're going to find out relatively quickly. This can apply to a lot of different tools in different scenarios. So I think this is worthwhile watching. It's not going to be a long presentation. Enjoy. I always like to start off with an initial drawing. It doesn't have to be a fancy one like this. It could be scribbled on a Post-it note, a napkin, a scrap piece of paper. It doesn't matter. As long as you have some sort of representation of what you're up to, what you're troubleshooting, anything. So in this case, we've got my laptop here with two Ethernet ports. So we're using the built-in NIC. We're also using a docking station connected to this laptop as well. These are the two monitor ports on this Network Critical Smart NA packet broker. So on one side, we've got, we'll just call it the client, for example. Here's the client going in that port, out that port, into the main switch, across the switch, firewall, into the packet broker, out to the internet. So it's on the outside of the firewall, okay? This is kind of important because later on, if you look at a trace file or if you give somebody a trace file like me, I need this. I need to understand where the tools were placed. And through the miracle of technology, we've got labels. And what did I put on there? Well, I put the description of the actual interface, the network interface. This is called Killer. I renamed it. It's a Killer interface. And I put a little extra stuff in there. You don't need to do that. But as long as you understand, like in this case, the red is the killer, the orange is the Ethernet adapter, which is the docking station. It makes a whole lot of sense. The client, I put the MAC address. Firewall, put the MAC address. The actual, I'm going to call it the modem that faces the internet, or the thing that we talk to first when we hit the internet, its MAC address. You just leave it at that. It's an LTE, which makes it a little fun and interesting. And now we've got an overlay of the actual physical topology and the addresses that we're going to see in the trace file. It's kind of important to have these two MAC addresses on the firewall, the outside and the inside, because depending on which side of the conversation you're looking at, you're going to see one or the other. Now, it really doesn't matter if you're doing lab work or if you're troubleshooting or if you're doing a presentation. Get in the habit of documenting your methodology. How do you do things? How do you test? In this case, how did I merge the files? Well, with Wireshark, there's two ways to merge a file from the GUI. Of course, you can do this from the command line as well, but I'm not going to touch that right now. So I had two NICs. I get two resulting files, right? Now I have to merge them. One way to do this is go to File Merge, right? So open the first file, pardon me, and then File Merge and select the other file. Easy. The other way, which I like, is you just select both files in your file manager, Explorer, whatever you use, and just drag and drop them both into Wireshark, and Wireshark immediately merges them together. Now, Wireshark will create a new untitled file. That's kind of important, right? It's untitled. That means it's not saved. So you must save that file. And I always encourage people, as soon as you're done with the merge, quickly save it. Just in case you have a software issue or you forget or whatever, just while it's fresh in your head, file saved, done. All right, one thing out of the way. You could even go to your comments, to file comments, and add that this is a merged file from 1 and 2, that kind of thing. I also include the word merged in the file name, and that reminds me later on that this is a merged file from the client and the firewall trace files. Now, merging two trace files sound cool. It sounds like you can get a lot of value out of it, and you can. Trust me, you can. But there's a couple of little things you have to deal with. Number one, it's pretty hard to figure out which packet is which. So which packet is packet 1 from the firewall, is packet 1 from the client side, that kind of thing. So what I like to do is just assign a color to it. It's so much easier. Sometimes if the MAC addresses are different enough, you can just call the MAC addresses certain names like client, firewall inside, firewall outside. That helps as well. The color thing seems to jump out at you, make things a little bit more obvious. So the first thing you do, or I do, is I go to the view coloring rules. I disable all the current rules because I don't want Wireshark telling me that there's a TCP reset, whatever, in the middle of my trace. I don't care about that right now. I just want to know which packet came from what side. So this is the resulting trace file with the color rules. And you can see I got a black and I got a white, right? I got a red and I got a green. So I can immediately start to see patterns. And if you had, for example, packet loss, the pattern would be disrupted. It's just a really good visualization when you try to baseline the trace, when you try to get your feet wet with the trace. And again, don't worry about errors right now. Just try to figure out the flow, which way things are moving, and then from there you can analyze much more effectively. Back to our diagram, I've added a box, and these are the packet numbers that we saw in the previous slide over here. Now this is really helpful. So now I can see packet 1. You don't have to do this to all of them. Trust me, this is just for a couple of them. Just again, you can get the flow, get your feet wet. So packet 1 leaves the client, goes into the broker, comes out over here, that's where we captured it, over to the internet. Of course it goes bang, 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 bang. But I'm worried about where I captured it and what direction the packet was moving. So this starts to show me that, hey, if I see packet 2 go and packet 3 come back, then from this interface, I'll probably see both of these packets, the one leaving and the one returning, that sort of thing. I can't stress this enough. Again, you don't have to do this for every packet, but if you just take the time at the beginning, then the traces will look a lot more obvious when there is a problem. So like most people like to do, we see the trace and we go, uh-oh, no response found. It's kind of goofy because we know the pings worked. We saw it on the command line, right? We pinged 888. They went out and they came back. So what's up with that? Now this is where knowing your tool helps. So number 1, we're using Wireshark. Number 2, we're using a network critical tab. And who knows, in a real environment, you might have other stuff going on that you need to know about. In this case, that's the only 2 variables we're concerned about. So I can see packet 1 is a client leaving, right? Packet 2 is from the outside of the firewall leaving. So that's from our first trace, that's from our second trace. Now you can see that this is just white and black, which makes it a lot harder to recognize compared to that. See that? So this I've just done for clarity, but I would prefer to keep the colors on if I could, right? Now you can see it says no response found, and the client was saying, does that mean we got a problem? What does that mean? Because the pings worked. And this is my rule of thumb. Even when you baseline an application for the first time or baseline a client or a network for the first time, if you ever see an error, your question should be to yourself, did it work? And the answer here is, yeah, it did work. So then this error, no response found, can't possibly be true. I don't know what it means yet, but it can't possibly be true. Why? Because the pings worked. Okay? So that's what you got to ask yourself. Even if this was a client trace booting up or launching an application, you see errors, but the application launched properly, chances are a lot of those errors might be red herrings. You want to look into them, don't get me wrong, but it's not like, oh my God, we got to figure this out. Okay? So I glanced at this a few times and I was totally confused. I had no idea what was going on. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to spin my wheels on this too much because everything works. I'm going to run it by my friends. So I reached out to Laura Chappell and Mike Panaki, and I told them what I was seeing and what the trace file looked like. We were all kind of poking at it, and then we noticed, hey, you know what's weird? The packet size on the reply is different than the request. Right? Usually if you ping something, the same size comes back, right? So this is markedly different. Like this is way smaller. So this is when we found out something that we just weren't aware of because we never ran into this before. Wireshark is flagging those errors, right? It's saying that there's no response found, even though the ICMP identifiers all lined up, which is what we all thought it would use. But obviously Wireshark is also using the size of the packet to compare the request and the reply. That's what it seems like, right? So in this example, the moral of the story is everything worked, so don't freak out. Number 2, this request that came back was super small, which is why Wireshark was saying no response found, right? It wasn't correlating them properly. And the last thing is I followed up with the client, and this packet broker, sure enough, had packet slicing enabled. So they were slicing packets on the internet side of the packet broker. So it left the network full size. When it came back in, the broker was slicing it because somebody had previously set up packet slicing, and the analyst we're working with right now wasn't aware of that. So he didn't know. So that's why you should know about your tools. You should check your tools. If you have packet brokers, make sure there's a default configuration you fall back on when you're done with it. If you're using Wireshark, make sure you've got a standard profile that you can load for support, and all that will make your life a lot easier. Hope that helped, folks. Have a good day. Bye for now.